Now, I gotta start this review out by saying that I know there are all kinds of performance issues with Jedi Survivor, especially on the PC, and that EA's response to the situation, as usual, hasn't been the best. However, I'm going to try and review the game as it's supposed to be, shall we say? Which is by no means me excusing the problems many are having with the game or condoning EA for releasing a buggy game. Not that every AAA title nowadays doesn't come out with a ton of bugs. Basically, I'd rather give thoughts on, again, the game as it is supposed to be, and hopefully eventually will be for everyone after it is all patched up, instead of going off about another blunder by EA. Though that said, I've personally had no issues whatsoever playing the game, which I've been doing on PS5. Though honestly, I haven't played all that much, or maybe I should say I haven't gotten that far because I've probably put in roughly 20 hours or so at this point, which would have been more than enough time to beat the first game, to beat Fallen Order, even for someone like me. But after that much time in Survivor, I don't feel like I've gotten all that far, which is in large part because there's simply so much more to do now in this game than there was in the first one. In fact, this game and everything that's been added kind of makes that first game almost feel like a demo for this one in comparison, or a proof of concept. Which is to take nothing away from Fallen Order. It was a great game, I very much enjoyed it, and I'm not complaining about it or anything in hindsight. I'm not actually saying it was nothing more than a demo. It's just that Survivor is essentially that game, but just more, and I mean a lot more. And whereas Fallen Order felt like an actual kind of game that just had a story, and a good one at that, this game feels more like a story I get to play through thanks to a great action game, if that kind of makes sense. It just feels like this is a more grandiose game on so many levels when compared to Fallen Order. And speaking of that story, I'm not going to get into any spoilers here. That'll probably be saved for a future video, a discussion on the story, I mean. But I will say that it is heavily connected to the High Republic era. And it's interesting to see just how deep they're trying to go into this time period that they've created. That it's certainly evolved beyond just books and comics like they initially said it was going to be, unless proven to be a success. And despite a lot of criticism from some as well as apathy from others who maybe wish Lucasfilm and Disney had embraced the old Republic over making their own new kind of time period, they must think it's a success or want to make it one at all costs, considering this game is dealing with it pretty extensively, as well as Eclipse going to be set during it, assuming that game ever comes out. And the Acolyte will also delve into this time period as well, though the end of that time period. But getting back to it, and again, no spoilers here, but this is basically a continuation of the story from the last game. And I say basically because a good 5 years has gone by and kinda a lot has happened in that time, I think. Some of which is covered in the book Battle Scars, which I did a review on over on my other channel if you're interested. Though if you want the really short review, it's not the best book ever written, and it offers you, I guess, a little bit in terms of explaining why the game starts the way it does, with the Mantis crew separated, which I don't consider a spoiler since we've seen that in the trailer. But overall, that book is something you can probably skip or not worry about impacting the story of this game all too much. Anyway, one way this game does pick up kind of right after the last one, or where it left off, is with force powers and abilities. You still have, more or less, every ability and upgrade you unlocked in Fallen Order, which I think is awesome, and I absolutely love that. I'm so glad you don't have to relearn the same things all over again, especially when you kind of consider you learned them over again in that first game, in a manner of speaking. And it really helps you feel like you're playing the same game / character, and just growing more and more powerful as you unlock even more new skills in this game. And there are quite a few new ones to unlock. There are several different skill trees that are maybe not the most extensive ever, but with so many it does help it feel like you really do have some options or choices to make with those skill points. And still being so early in the game like I am, I have no idea how far into these skill trees you'll eventually get, though I'm assuming that'll be impacted greatly by how much side stuff you choose to do along the way. And speaking of those skill trees, there are one for each type of lightsaber stance or combat style, and there are 5 different ones to pick from. And I'm happy to say all the stances do feel different or unique and have their uses. I find myself switching stances quite a bit depending on the situation or the opponent or enemy, which is really cool. I'm glad it's not just a preference or essentially the same thing in a different form, not just kind of a cosmetic option, if you will. And speaking of that, yes, there are once again a ton of cosmetics to collect to customize everything from your lightsaber to your blaster. Yes, you have a blaster now. But also things like facial hair and outfits and beady looks and so on, all the usual sort of things. It's more or less similar to the first game when it comes to all of this. It's just, again, more, and there are more ways to obtain some of these cosmetics. There are different items you can find across the worlds that can be traded in for these cosmetics, as well as some upgrades, like perks, which give you a number of slots to sort of fine-tune your character or your version of Cal, and give him a little bonus to certain stats or abilities, which I found to be a really nice touch. I'm someone who loves customization and options and building my character, so I'm very cool with this. There's also then a couple what you could kind of call mini games or little extra things to do, like growing your own garden with seeds you'll find across the world, or playing a game called Hollow Tactics against opponents you'll find across the worlds. And it's basically a little strategy game where you can fight with the things or the enemies you scan with BD, thus giving you even more of a reason, or a reason beyond XP and to collect them all, to remember to scan all the new opponents and opponent types you defeat. There's also basically side quests or other points of interest to check out across the worlds, not to mention you can just go exploring and find who knows what. The worlds don't feel so much like levels anymore, kind of like they did in Fallen Order, but they feel more like open worlds to explore, the planets I've been to at least. And they're once again bigger and more expansive and have a lot more just going on in general. They feel more alive, and because of this, and because of a bit more focus on that overall story, it does feel more like an RPG, which I also really personally like. And thankfully, with these bigger worlds, things like fast travel as well as mounts let you get around quicker and easier. No more of that, you get to the end of the level and you have to run back thing. That was one of the most frustrating or annoying parts of that first game, I think, where it just felt like this completely unnecessary chore to always have to run back to the Mantis. Moving on here, once again, in this game, there's a big focus on solving puzzles, but nothing like mind-bendingly complicated or anything. Nothing you'll likely get stuck on for more than a couple minutes at the very most before you kind of figure it out. There's also a lot, and I do mean a lot of climbing and jumping puzzles. I feel like many more than there were in the first game. There's so many times you just want to go right over there, but it will require all these crazy detours, which for me kind of do start getting old after a while. Or maybe it's just because I tend to fall a lot and have a little difficulty with the controls from time to time, which could and likely is just me. I don't know. Part of the reason I'm not further is no doubt because, well, I'm not the best at the game, as you've probably figured out from the included footage of my playthrough that you're watching now, assuming you are watching and not just listening. Another reason it's taking so long is, again, there's just so much more to do, so much extra to look for. Like I was kind of saying before, the game feels more open world and less like levels. And there's been a few times now where I sat down to play for a couple hours and didn't progress the main story too much because I got distracted by something else. And, well, I don't see much of a reason to rush through the game as fast as humanly possible, other than to avoid story spoilers on the internet, I suppose. Moving on to things like graphics, I mean, the game is gorgeous on PS5, so I have to imagine it looks pretty incredible on a high-end PC. While it's working on PC, that is. Also, much like the first game, everything looks and feels like Star Wars, and it's awesome to get to go to places like Coruscant this time around. It looked beautiful, as you can see by my gameplay footage, and I'm sure there's other cool places I haven't seen yet because I am so far behind, if you will. And though I feel like I'm forgetting to talk about a great many things when it comes to the game, though I may end up making a sort of ramble video on the other channel about Survivor this weekend, I'll sum it all up by saying this is easily one of the best Star Wars games I have ever played. And that's coming from someone who can remember as far back as playing The Empire Strikes Back on the Atari 2600, and has played many of the games in between that and this one, including Super Star Wars, which I still have nightmares about, and if you've played that game, you probably know what I'm talking about. But anyway, like I keep saying, this feels like playing Fallen Order all over again, only with so much more added into it, as well as improvements or fixes to player complaints like traveling or getting back to your ship, usually being such a big pain in the ass in that first game. Now that's basically a non-issue. And so if you enjoyed that first game, there's almost no doubt you're going to enjoy this one quite a bit. And if you didn't play that one at all, let me just say, I definitely recommend giving both of them a shot. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about Jedi Survivor. Are you playing it? Are you loving it? Are you hating it? Or is this something you're maybe passing on or waiting to try until after all the bugs are fixed? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.